We are at a turning point in Jesus' life. Not too long ago, a month or so maybe, Jesus has sent the 12 disciples out, given them the authority to heal and to teach and to proclaim the good news, and they come back just filled with all the incredible things that happen in his name by their ministry. And Jesus sees that they are tired, and so he takes them off to a quiet place so that they can have some rest and they can pray. But the crowd sees them go, and they follow him. And you'll recognize the story that comes next. Jesus teaches all day, many people are healed, and then it's late, and the disciples say, it's getting late, you need to send these folks home. And Jesus says, no, you go ahead and feed them. And we all know how that story ends, with the feeding of the 5,000 and 12 baskets of food left over. And then Jesus says to them, again when they are alone and in a quiet place, Jesus says, who do you say that I am? And we know how that story goes as well, except that in the Gospel of Luke, some say Elijah, some say John, some say a prophet, and Jesus says, who do you say that I am? And Peter gives the right answer, you are the Messiah. And that's the end of that. And Jesus begins to tell them what will happen. They're on their way to Jerusalem, and that he will be given up there and will die and be raised again. And they go on their way. And today's story is about 8 days after they have had this conversation and Peter has made his revelatory comments. Jesus again goes up to the mountain to pray, and he takes with him Peter and James and John. And he is in prayer, praying to the Father, and suddenly his face is transformed and his clothes become dazzlingly white. And the 3 disciples, see him standing there with Moses and Elijah, and they are having a conversation about what will happen to Jesus in Jerusalem, about Jesus' own exodus to the cross, to the resurrection. Now, almost always, it seems to me that I have heard people talking about how important this was for the disciples to see, how important it was for them to be there when this event happened. But I think we leave somebody out of the equation. I think it was important for Jesus. I think Jesus needed that moment. And here's why. Jesus was a human. And we humans need confirmation. We need affirmation. We need somebody to hold us up at times when we are in transition, when there is trouble in our lives, when we're not quite sure where things are going to go. We see where we're supposed to be, but we're a little bit afraid about that. We're just not quite sure that we've got it all under control, which of course is what we want to do. Yes, it was important for the disciples to see this reminder that Jesus really is the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God. But I think just as important it was for Jesus to be there with these 2 figures from the Old Testament and talk about what will happen to him and how God is in that happening. And of course, Peter, once again, puts his foot in it and says, let's just stay here. Let's just sit in this place. We'll build you booths. It'll be neat. We'll all sit here together. We'll have a party. And this great cloud comes over them. Clouds are always scary in the Gospels. If you don't know that, you should know it today. And they're a little bit worried about that cloud. As a matter of fact, they're downright terrified. And the voice says to them, the voice from the cloud, the voice of the Lord says, "This is my son, listen to him." That was for the disciples. They needed that affirmation that they were on the right path, that they were doing the right thing, that Jesus really was the one who was leading them in this journey. And then they come down from the mountain. And of course, they don't say anything to anybody else. Who's going to believe you in the first place? And second, they're still trying to take it in. What was that? What was happening? So they're quiet, and they get down the mountain, And we hear this tragic, tragic scene of a crowd gathered around a man whose son has an evil spirit, and he's asked the disciples to heal them, and they can't do it. After all that they had done, when Jesus sent them out, they can't do this one. I've always wondered why. I have a feeling it's because their confidence levels were high. We can do this. We've done it before. We got the power. And then they didn't, because they relied on themselves and not on the Lord. So the man begs Jesus to heal his son, and Jesus turns on the disciples, turns on them and says, "You faithless generation, how much longer do I have to put up with you?" Boy, is that a come down from the mountain, from his experience there, from his confirmation of what he's doing is right, and it is of God, and it's where God is sending him. And he comes down, here they are. And he's able, of course, to cast out the demon. At some point, he says to them, "You have to pray in order to do this sort of thing." Oh, right. We have to be in communication, in connection with God for things to happen the way God wants them to happen. Not the way I want it to happen. Not the way I want to do it so that my face will shine and that my glory will be revealed. That's just not the way it works. And it's still not the way it works. Many of us have had what we call mountaintop experiences. And if you've had one, whether it's going away and being at a conference or an event where you were absolutely lifted up and raised up and you know you were in the presence of the Lord and it is glorious and wondrous, and maybe your face doesn't shine and your clothes certainly don't turn dazzling white, but you know the presence of God in a way that you have not known it down in the valley. And when you return to the valley, which we all have to do, nobody really wants to hear about your mountaintop experience. That's because it's not theirs, it's yours. It was for your sake that God chose to reveal God's self to you in that time and place. And other people, if they even believe you, well, it's not relevant to them. Okay, sure, whatever. Great. Jesus didn't need to tell anybody about that experience, and the disciples were afraid to, because they were sure everybody would just kind of go, "Yeah, right, guys, come on, let's go eat." We have to be careful of those moments. We have to listen to what it is God is telling us, particularly when we are in that time of transition, when we are at a point in our lives when a decision has to be made, when something is going to change so radically that we know that without the Lord, it won't happen at all. That we know that we are required to respond, or it won't happen at all. This is what that experience was like for Jesus. It's what it was like for Peter and James and John. Sure, they had said the words. They'd watched Jesus heal and preach and teach, and that incredible feeding of the 5,000. What was that about, they wonder still. And this experience affirms for them who Jesus is. And yet we still have to go down the mountain. We still have to go down where people are clamoring to be healed, where there is crime and destitution and people who are starving and hungry who need our help and are constantly asking us for it. Real life doesn't happen on the mountaintops. The mountaintop experience allows us to carry that back down to the valley, knowing that we are confirmed, knowing that we are convicted in our faith to do what God has called us to do. The valley is where we live. It's always there. Jesus had to remember that too, and he didn't go from the mountaintop to the Golgotha without going through the valley. The valley was necessary, and it was sometimes very affirming. It was not just terrible and awful. It was good and wonderful, and they still gathered, and they still ate together, and they still laughed, and they still brought people to Jesus for healing, and he healed them, and he still taught. He's taught a little bit of a different message from now on because he's on his way to Jerusalem. Nothing in a lot of his life changed. The sort of everyday life of being a disciple of Christ and being the Christ were pretty much the same, but he had this vision, this experience behind him, always walking with him, always saying, you're on the right path, you're doing the right thing. When we listen to the Lord, when we hear God calling us into a change in our lives, into a way that is going to be different, it's going to be great, but it's also going to be a little scary. It always is. When we know that we carry that affirmation of God, that call forward, we will walk as Jesus walked. Every day sort of seeming the same, but yet not quite. Always just a little bit better, a little bit more confident because we know the Lord is with us. That's what a mountaintop experience is to do for us. Not just bring us some great, incredible experience that we go, oh, that was fabulous, and go back to work on Monday and say, well, that was done. It's a good weekend. Loved the retreat. Great conversation, good people. No, we bring that back with us and we don't talk about it. We show it. We show it in how that life, that everyday life, changes just a little bit. Just a little bit. And we know that we can have those experiences again when we need them. When God believes that we need that affirmation, when we need that help, God will be there for us. It has happened in my life. I know it has happened in many of your lives. It happens at times of great trouble. It happens at times of great transition. It happens at times when we're just sort of open to it. When we go away on retreat or on vacation or whatever it is, and we have a chance to just sort of let everything go, to leave it all on the table and just breathe. Often in those moments, we find ourselves hearing more, seeing more, listening more. And when that happens, we are open to an experience of transfiguration. Not that our faces will shine, not that our clothes will become dazzling white. Nobody's going to suggest they build 3 booths for us. Probably not going to see Moses and Elijah, but we will know God's presence. God's presence that is so vital to the way we live, the way we move, and the way we have our being, the way we love, the way we survive the hard times, and make sure that the good times are not overshadowed. Brothers and sisters, this event was just as much for Jesus as it was for the disciples. And so even though we are on the disciple level and not fully human and fully divine, we understand that even in his humanity, Jesus needed to be reminded of his divinity.